Please welcome to the CMX Summit virtual stage, Mark Birch.
Thank you, Valentina. Really excited to be here at CMX Summit Rise and to talk a little bit about this thing called building the internal community, why that's so important. So as Valentina said, I'm a principal startup advocate at AWS. What that means is I just help startup founders to understand all different programs and services to build, grow, and scale their startups. I wrote a book about community building called Community Box I'll share a little bit about. And I used to work at Stack Overflow, helping big organizations to set up internal knowledge communities. And this is why I'm so passionate about the topic. And hopefully we could all learn together over the next 25 or so minutes about why internal communities are so important. And to give us some context, I need to begin with a short story. So let me go ahead and do the little presentation thing and walk us through a story about building communities and a story about communication. And it starts with November 21st, 1960. It was a day of disaster for NASA and US space program. America was already far behind the Soviet Union in the space race when their first ever unmanned test flight, the Mercury Redstone 1, launched a whole 4 inches off the ground before crashing. In the analysis afterwards, what they realized is that the capsule and the rocket, they weren't coupled together correctly. And in the book Team of Teams, it goes into more detail saying that the interface failures expose inherent problems. You had small groups that were really effective at their own work, but when you start to bring all those small groups together for the entire project, for to support the vehicle, that's when they ran into issues. And fast forward a couple decades later, another disaster, this time in Chernobyl. And it was a lack of understanding of the imminent danger of the power plant, the culture of arrogance, the inability for managers to listen to the engineers. It caused a series of catastrophic errors that led to the worst nuclear disaster in human history. Why am I talking about disasters in a story around how to build internal communities? Because the common theme is that failure to communicate. We have plenty of ways to communicate, whether it's via phone, email, Slack, Zoom, what have you. But what we're communicating is simply not connecting. What enables that connection so that communication can be heard and inspire action across people, teams, and organizations? It's community, what we've been talking about for the past few days here at the conference. And everyone has maybe their own tweak on the definition of community, but the way I describe it and the way that's relevant for this topic is it's about who we are and what we care about. And through a community, we create norms. They define the beliefs that we have about a community that lead to ways of engaging and communicating with each other that in turn builds trust, fosters safety. If you think about it, community is really the mechanism for collaboration. And techie folks, we understand that. I've been a software developer myself for many years. And so we understand things like the value of open source, places like GitHub, Stack Overflow. I've been a DevOps Days event organizer, and those are held across the globe that are really just freely created. And we understand the value of these things because we understand that collaboration leads to better solutions, less reinventing the wheel, better software quality. But why is it so difficult to create these communities inside organizations? It often feels like being alone in a forest when you're the one that's tasked to do this. And it seems like it would be a natural opportunity being inside an organization to build these types of communities. But when I talk to organizations, I see that the level of collaboration and community is sorely lacking. And sometimes it's even actively discouraged by organizational silos, politics, and personal agendas. So for the rest of this talk, I want to share the practices that I've learned over the past decade in building communities that I've launched to hopefully give us some guidance along a journey to building a healthy, thriving internal technology community. So I want to begin by talking about the ingredients that make communities work. And I want to start with a game in the park. So many years ago, I had these dreams to move out to San Francisco to pursue my .com 1.0 millionaire dreams. I did not become an internet millionaire, but I did get to meet lots of people on the way, including a small group as I was walking through Golden Gate Park one day, a group playing flag football. They needed an extra person to fill in their 5-on-5, so I joined in. Weeks later, at 5-on-5, it turned to 12-on-12. Everybody wanted in. It got complicated, complex. We had plays and routes. And in one of these games, I went out on a route, jumped up, saw visions of glory, and then got pummeled by 5 other people at the same time, ending my Hall of Fame career in flag football. But in weeks later, I heard they went on to 15-on-15. But it gets to the very first principle I want to talk about, which is the idea that participation is a tricky thing to get right. Too many, it feels like that flag football game. It feels like trying to get on the subway during rush hour in Tokyo. But too few, it feels like a ghost town or a party where no one shows up. It's a market dynamics problem. And you really got to get that balance right between too little and too much involvement. The second principle that's super critical is trust. And trust that's the glue that brings us together and allows us to want to help each other. I call this, when it comes to communities, the trust layer. And it's the foundation upon which everything else you build on top of. And how do you develop that trust layer, though? I'll talk about that in a little bit when I talk about the building process, but you want to be able to foster open participation, providing incentives, and being able to speak to the why it's important. Now, everyone assumes that everyone needs to get on board with the community when it comes to internal communities, but that's the most fundamental mistake organizations make. You don't want to force people in. Communities, something that has to grow organically because people see value in it. And I often say that having everyone or even most people involved, that's not success. Success is in the growth of value that's created by a community. But you may be asking, okay, well, there needs to be at least a minimum number. So a decade ago, I read a post. It was called 1,000 True Fans. You may have heard of it or have read it yourself, but it made the case that an artist can be super successful by not necessarily having millions of diehard fans, but only 1,000 diehard fans that can support the artist through thick and thin. And the internet also works along the same way. There's some sites that have millions of followers, some that have even billions. But there are plenty of sites, actually the vast majority of sites, that thrive on just that small fan base to sustain itself. Which gets to the next principle or ingredient of communities, which is this concept of participation inequality. And it was introduced by Will Hill of AT&T Laboratories back in the 90s. But as the 2000s came about, with internet usage spiking, online communities starting to form and grow, that became known as the rule of 90-9-1. And simply put, it's the idea that communities have different tiers of participation. 1% create the content, 9% are kind of involved, and 90% they're lurkers. They're just kind of looking on the outskirts. And that's how a lot of us experience many large communities today, whether it's a Reddit or a Stack Overflow. And we might think that's a bad thing to have such low participation rates. Let's flip it on its head. Just as an example, Stack Overflow has 50 million unique average users every month. What if 50% of that 50 million participate on a regular basis? The site would become overwhelmed with poor content as moderators struggle to handle the volume of contributions. And most of us can relate, because if you use Slack or other messaging apps at work, you know that it could be really annoying at times. I have a friend who's a CTO at a large global bank who once called their Slack instance a dumpster fire of gibberish, because it's just filled with condo listings, bus schedules, birthday best wishes. And it gets to the point that in large communities, too many active users creates a worse user experience and decreases participation. But you may be saying, Mark, you still need like a minimum number. What if we're talking about 200? Does that mean only 2 are actively involved and 20 modestly involved? Luckily, in the work I've done at Stack Overflow and through a lot of research with other internal community building efforts, what I've seen historically is up to 10% are going to be actively involved, 40% are going to be modestly involved, and the rest are going to be lurkers. But it also will cycle through a lot faster because of your onboarding of new employees and expansions or acquisitions through the way companies grow organically. And so now that we've talked about some of the theory, let's dig into what it takes to actually build the community itself from the ground up. And over my experience of building successful communities, I've kind of partitioned out like 8 specific steps that are part of the structure of growing a community and getting participation right at the onset. So I'll spend a little bit of time here going through these different steps, and it begins with define the why. I'm always surprised by folks that want to launch communities that skip over this critical step. But you need to understand that in order to know that you're going to fulfill a need that people have. So you got to ask your potential members why they care. You got to ask the with them question, or what's in it for me, so they know what the community is going to be for and the value that they're going to get out of by joining. You also need to create some value up front. It's hard to go to a place that seems empty or like there's nothing there to go to. You need a starting point. That's why I always recommend you seed the community at start with great content and events. You got to also make it easy for folks to contribute. If you lower the barrier to participate, more people will want to engage and find the ways that they feel comfortable in engaging at the level of commitment that they're comfortable with. You also want to rally your fans. We talked about those fans before as one of the fundamental ingredients of community building. Well, by rallying your internal fans, they already believe in the vision. So help bring them involved, get them involved and bring them into the fold to help evangelize out to the folks that they know, to draw those folks into the community early on. As people start to get involved, there's going to be lots of contributions, and you want to be able to promote the contributions that are going to be valuable. And you may want to use mechanisms like newsletters, internal chat, lunch and learns. And by doing that, not only are you supporting and showing what good looks like, you're showing what good content looks like to the lurkers to get them to want to be involved at some point. In order to continue to get those quality contributions, you want to provide incentives. So you want to recognize and reward people for being involved. And you can do that through different mechanisms within the community itself. You can offer things like swag, tickets to tech events. Think about all those non-monetary rewards that can be very high value. As an example, with AWS, we have Heroes and we have Community Builders, 2 different programs of evangelists that talk a lot about AWS in their own communities. And we give them swag boxes, and it's amazing to see the response that you see on Twitter and LinkedIn when people share the unboxing of their swag gifts that we've sent to them. So these non-monetary rewards can be super, super valuable. The other thing is that you want to try and incorporate the work of community in people's normal daily work. And why this is important is that people often see community as some sort of side thing to their own work, when in fact, the value of community is potentially, and often is, to help create value in the work you're doing and helping you to achieve your goals or your team's goals. So find ways to incorporate into the processes or ways of doing work, so it's not seen as a completely separate thing. And the last thing, and there's already been sessions about this already at CMX Summit Rise, but involve leadership. Get them excited about being involved in systematic ways so they can't just push it off as something that's on their to-do list but not important. Help them to understand the prioritization of being involved and being part of events or being part of content contributions, so that it gives permission and shows that there's a core value of being involved in community, that it's important. So when I talk to organizations, though, IT leaders, engineering, they all agree that, yeah, community sounds great. Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, sure. Like, we love the fact that people want to contribute and share and help each other out. They understand the promise of better productivity, but there's still a lot of skepticism. They want to know how it's going to scale and not just become another failed collaboration or community project. And I understand the frustration. we've been through lots of these iterations of trying to build collaboration and community inside organizations. My first iteration of this was with Lotus Notes. I don't know if anyone here listening knows what that is, but it was one of the very first attempts at groupware, collaborative platforms. Using the email program myself, I knew it was the most unusable piece of software I've ever had experienced. But over time, the platforms changed. They shifted to things like Outlook or SharePoint. Later, it became social collaboration tools like Yammer, Jive. But unsurprisingly, a lot of these failed to win fans. It just felt like adoption by corporate dictate. And it's often because it feels like it's an empty database or a chicken and egg problem. When you deploy communities, there's very little inside a community itself to draw people in. People have to contribute to make community work. So how do you do that? How do you get people excited enough to want to be involved from the get-go? Well, Facebook solved this. They cracked that problem. And the way they did it was really interesting. They delivered something of immediate value, an online student directory where you can message each other. It hit upon an innate need every student has in college, which is to make friends. It hit that what's in it for me to hook users in. And oftentimes in many of these internal community or collaborative projects, that's a key ingredient that's missing. They neglect to address that innate why that would get people to participate. So the second problem here is the one of scale. And again, Facebook solved this in a really clever way. They didn't open to everyone. At first, it was only to students with Harvard email, then a few select schools, then all schools with .edu, then everyone in the US, and then everyone across the globe. And the reason this worked is because of Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe, popularized by Robert Metcalfe, the inventor of the Ethernet, stated that the value of a network grows by n squared with each additional node. Basically, all that really means is that from a community standpoint, it just means that each additional user is adding exponential value. So it's really a balance of how to think about opening up a community to create enough excitement and energy, but balancing out with trying to open it up to everyone and having that backfire. So how do we go about doing that? How do you scale so it can be self-sustaining? Well, one of the things I've learned, or three key things I've learned, is that it can't just be a big bang approach. You got to think about not only support from top, but also from the grassroots. You also got to plan to grow. You can't just kind of wing it. You got to have a plan in terms of thinking about how you structure content, events, all the things that are going to make the community work over time. And you also can't fake or cheat your way to growth. It's really about organic and authentic. Once people get a whiff of things that are inauthentic, they don't want to participate. And so I look at this as a stepwise approach, and every magnitude you get to is another step in growing the community. And I call this concept the 50, 500, 5,000 principle. So how it goes is that at the 50 level, this is when you want your true fans that I talked about before. You trust them, they trust you, they want to be involved, so they're going to contribute all of that initial content and seed that initial community. But not only are they creating and engaging, they're also establishing cultural norms of the community. Then at some point, once you've seeded the community, you can then start to expand out to the 500 level, bringing on other like groups of users to join this initial seed of a community. And because you've already seeded it, and there's already these norms and behaviors that have been established, it's very easy to onboard new users. They understand what constitutes good contributions and engagement. You still want to keep it small, though, because you want to monitor, tweak adoption, and continue to build that repository of trust, building that trust layer. And then lastly, a 5,000 level. This is when you do open it up to the company at large. And this is when organic becomes viral. Again, it's because you have more users joining that it's creating value at a faster rate. So hopefully this has given you some ideas, some thoughts, some concepts to work from. Obviously, there's a lot more complexities involved in building a vibrant internal community. Building community, it's not an easy journey. Getting people to want to share openly is a massive cultural shift, as I learned in setting up these communities inside large corporates when I was at Stack Overflow. But what I found is that if you optimize for why to hook people in, and then you scale in that structured stepwise approach, you will find success. Now, I talk a lot more about the specific tactics and things that I've discovered in my journey in community building in my book, Community in a Box. So you can check that out if you have more interest in the topic. So I really do appreciate this time. This has been super awesome to be here, to be invited to speak at CMX Summit Rise. It's been super inspiring to see the growth of this field and this whole area called community. And so if you do want to continue the conversation, I encourage you to reach out. Again, my name is Mark Birch at Amazon Web Services. Hit me up on Twitter at Mark S. Birch. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Email me over at Amazon, and would be glad to carry on the conversation if you have further questions. But I can also take some questions now, and let me stop screen share so we can we can chat a bit before the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Mark. So many great golden nuggets there. And yeah, make sure you go and get a copy of his book, Community in a Box. I just love the name of the book. I mean, that's what's drawing me in. I mean, to have everything in a box ready to go. But we all know that it takes a lot of work to build a community. And yeah, especially to get people to come back, engage constantly. I remember David said at the 2019 summit that building a community is a marathon, not a sprint. And it really is. It's a marathon that never ends, in my opinion. But yeah. Okay, we have some questions coming in, so I want to go straight to those. First one.
I just love the comment about going old school with Lotus Notes. I thought one person that actually knew what that was.
Lotus Notes. Wow, we're going back. Maybe we will start talking about floppy disks. Chris B says, how would you argue against someone telling you, but we need a community, i.e. top-down approach, especially from executive level?
What I did is actually I gave them my pitch because I got this at AWS. So when I joined, I kind of became the person that, hey, you know things about community, so we're going to go to you. So give you context, AWS has 175 different services. And there's teams behind each one of those services. And they all think, they all kind of work independently, and that's what allows us to innovate and be so fast. But it also creates this crazy convolution of just ideas and things that come at you. So a few months after I joined, I got a few of the teams reach out to me saying, hey, we're going to build a community. Tell us how to do that. So, I love the enthusiasm, but you're right. You got to be able to push back a little bit and explain the things I explained here in this conversation, which is, here are steps. Like, these are things you would have to do. And if you just took that one slide, I'm happy to share these slides, by the way. Like, this is not like some proprietary stuff. I share a lot of stuff on my blog, for example. But if you do want, you can just hit me up on LinkedIn or email, what have you. But that one slide where I talk about the 8 steps, usually that's enough for people to recognize, oh yeah, okay, well, let's think about that. So, but you do want to balance. You want to get people to recognize, okay, there's work, but we can do it in a logical, stepwise fashion, and we can build metrics and data around the work that we do in progressing a community. But you can't just you can't do it willy-nilly. You can't just think, oh, it's going to build a community. It's going to happen by itself. It's a very pragmatic, structured approach.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a lot of understanding that needs to be done. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to build a community that's going to be active tomorrow. And we're all just sitting there thinking, that's not going to happen. There's a lot of understanding that needs to be done. And some people may not want to understand or don't have the time to understand. And that's fine. But making people aware of, this is what needs to be done. Can you do it? Like, are you willing to do it? Are you committed? Do you have the time? And a lot of people don't, and that's okay. But yeah. Okay. Lily says, can you talk about AWS community programs, heroes versus builders?
Yes. Fascinating story. I'll go quick because I know we don't have much time, but AWS Heroes was established quite some time ago. And it's a it's a very long nomination process where it's all kind of done internally to recognize people that have been doing outstanding contributions out there in the world. But there's a very finite number, and we do that for a reason. But it also meant that there's a lot of people that we felt could be heroes, but just weren't at the bar, that were missing out. So one of my colleagues, Jason Dunn, who I had on a Clubhouse show to talk about how we think about building communities at AWS, it was a great Clubhouse session. I do encourage you, if you are a Clubhouse fan, to follow the AWS Startups Club that I started. But we had a really great session where he talked about the fact that within a year, they recognized that they need to get other people involved. So they created a separate program called Community Builders, which doesn't necessarily have maybe the prestige of heroes, but still got a lot of people in the fold. And when we would send out the swag boxes, for example, I've never, like, my Twitter and LinkedIn streams just went like bonkers for like a week because people are so excited about receiving something as a token of appreciation for the great work that they're doing. And we also have a Slack channel just for the community builders. So there's a ton of sharing that goes on there. And we all are participants in moderating from the AWS perspective, but it's really driven by their contributions. So they're always sharing like blog posts or videos or Twitch streams that they're doing. So it's been an awesome community to see that grow and thrive. And I think at last count, we had 5,000 submissions for people who want to be community builders in our last outreach, which is like amazing numbers.
Yeah, how do you go through all of those? That's a task right there.
There's a team that's vetting through all of that, and it takes a while.
Yeah. Oh, good. I mean, swag has been a huge topic. It always is a huge topic with community building. All right, Mark. Thank you so much. I will be back here in a few minutes with our last session on the forum stage. I'll see you in a minute.
Take care, everyone. Bye.